right, ladies and gentlemen, with the release of Brant, what I wanted to do was take some time to make another tier list. Except this time, instead of seeing what the overall strength is of a character, what the strength is of a weapon, or something like a Sonata set, I wanted to take the perspective of somebody that's a little bit more casual. Maybe somebody that's not taking that much time to, invest in things like rotations, and create a tier list focused on the strongest characters if you're somebody that's not very sweaty at the game. And so when we're going through this tier list and we're thinking about every single character on the roster, what we're going to be focusing on is A, how easy they are to play, B, the type of investment that you're going to need to get a lot out of them, and C, the kind of work that they need to do across like their team comps, across their team building, and their rotations to actually go ahead and execute in normal gameplay. And so when we think about what these characters are going to be used for, this means that you might be getting like a 2-minute clear in the TOA, maybe like 1 minute and 45 seconds, when fully built teams are usually, clearing it around the minute mark. And in modes like Weewa, maybe you're getting scores that are like just at the tip of 4,500 instead of maybe the 6,000s or the 7,000s that super invested teams will typically be going for. And so with that, do keep all of those specifications in mind as we go throughout the rankings here, and I'll be explaining why each character is where they are. And so we're going to go by release in terms of the limited roster. We've got all of the different characters lined up over here, and then we'll start getting into some of the standard and 4-star units after that. When we think about the rankings from S all the way to A, B, C, and D, these are going to be the characters in S that are going to be performing exceptionally well, even if you haven't, met some of those like skill qualifications or invested a lot into the characters, into learning them. And then D are going to be characters that are, maybe a lot more mechanically intensive. And if you don't do a lot in terms of learning with them, you're going to struggle a fair bit in the content. So with that, let's go ahead and let's get it started with the very first limited character added to the game, Jiyan. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'll go ahead and I'll put Jiyan in S. The reason why I'm putting Jiyan in S is that he has room for optimization in his kit, in his rotations, to do things like double Qinglong, get more DPS out of his gameplay. But if you're not doing any of those things, if you're just going from like a support to a Mortifi and then onto Jiyan, you're not doing things like cancels, he still performs. And he does admittedly have one of the easiest rotations in the game if you're not optimizing it, in that you liberation with him and then literally hold down the left mouse button. That will deal less damage than doing a sweaty double Qinglong rotation on him, but it's just something you can do. And he functions pretty decently well and will clear content performing in that fashion. He gets a lot done. He has the AoE grouping for mindless, brainless, brain-off, destructive performance in Weewa. And the only mode that he really struggles in for a casual is going to be holograms. And so I am thinking about maybe dropping him to A because of how difficult he can be to pilot in holograms, specifically bosses like Hikari, Inferno Rider, etc., that can damage you, while you're trying to actually deal damage in his Qinglong rotation. But at the end of the day, I think we'll put him at the top of A for now, because there are a lot of other characters who are easy to play and can actually just ignore mechanics that you might find in other game modes. But for now, because of how simple he can be to use in Weewa and the TOA, with holograms being his one weakness, we'll kind of keep him in S for now. Do keep in mind that the 3 game modes of Weewa, of TOA, and holograms are really going to be incorporated into here. And so if a character is good in TOA or Weewa and they're weaker in holograms, you will have to keep that in mind. Next up, we're going to have Yinlin. And I'm going to be real here, for a casual, Yinlin is not very good. Yinlin is one of the more difficult characters to play in the game, in that if you're not optimizing her rotations and doing a shit ton of swap cancels, she has an absurd amount of vulnerability where some of her attacks will just not happen. Her forte circuit will get interrupted. Her second cast of her skill will get interrupted, and it can be a complete disaster if you're not, again, quick swapping with her across her buildup. And what results from that is a lot of casuals are not getting a lot of mileage out of her, because you do have to get sweaty for her to kind of do anything in the first place. And so when we're keeping in mind that this is the skill issue tier list, she kind of is one of the characters that suffers the most. And she gets dramatically better the more you optimize her. But if you're not doing any of those optimization things in the first place, she's going to struggle a fair amount. Next up, we're going to have Jinhsi. And I'm going to place Jinhsi in S above Jiyan. Jinhsi is pretty much one of the premier single target boss slayers in this game. The fact that she's able to go ahead and throughout her team's rotation, just intro in, attack 4 times, and then deliver a crazy nuke. She's not on the field for an extremely long amount of time. It's really easy for her to avoid damage because of the fact that she's in the air. And in modes like the TOA and in modes like holograms, she is one of the easiest characters that you can use against certain bosses. There are some holograms that kind of really fuck her up, like the Sentry Gargoyle. And you know, that's kind of like the main one, but she's going to perform in pretty much every situation that isn't against a spectral resistant boss, like the Fallacy of No Return or the Morning Ikes. And her performance in TOA, where she's not at risk of getting one shot in holograms, my oh my. She has super armor, where in her incarnation state, she'll just shrug off attacks completely, and she's incredibly strong. And even if you're not using her sweatiest rotations, where you're like swap canceling different moves and like spamming jump and doing all these wild things, just like simply rotating from her support to her sub DPS that has the coordinated attacks and then going on to her, typically like with a Verina and Zhezhi, it'll get you the forte, it'll get you the damage you need, and if you have the build, you'll just clear the content without too much work on your end. The reason why she might be getting bumped down a little bit compared to other characters is that her performance in Weewa is kind of just dog shit. Her performance in Whimpering Wastes is one of the worst things I've ever seen. From the perspective of, if you use her best in slot team of Verina, and then you also use Zhezhi in Whimpering Wastes, you're gonna have a terrible fucking time. 100%, you're gonna have a terrible goddamn time, because she just lacks both consistent AoE damage and she overkills like crazy. And so if you pair her with a second DPS, you'll get better results, but she's not like an all-in-one character like you might be finding for somebody like Jiyan or like a Camellya for that game mode. I would just say she's S up here because she excels in 2 game modes, but she's a little bit rough in Whimpering Wastes for sure, especially if you're a casual. And she's still rough even if you're a bit more of an advanced player. So that's going to be Jinhsi. Now let's move on to Changli. Changli is going to go into B, and she's dragged down and up in different ways. I would say in modes like the TOA and holograms, she does require a pretty high skill floor to get a lot of performance out of. However, she does have extremely good performance even if she's not being played super sweaty and quick swap in a game mode like Whimpering Wastes. Keep in mind, this is for casuals. This is for people that maybe aren't like quick swapping like demons. They're not optimizing all the various movesets. They're not learning the sweatiest rotations. And if you're a player like that and you pick up Changli, you're really not going to do very good in game modes like TOA or holograms. However, if you are a player like that and you're putting her in Whimpering Wastes, she's still fine, because the way that she deals damage, right, in smaller bursts compared to other DPSs in a large AoE, it's perfect for that game mode. And so I would have actually ranked her a little bit lower if Whimpering Wastes was not in the game, but because Weewa is, that is honestly a bit of a home for some of the casual players, in that they'll get a lot of mileage out of Changli, even if they're not able to use her well in modes like the TOA or holograms. So that's where she's going to land. Do keep in mind that if you do play Changli exceptionally well with a lot of swaps and a lot of cancels, she ranks among the top tier classic characters. But it's a lot of APM. It's very intensive to do that sort of thing, and it can be really rough for a good portion of the player base to access that potential. So we moved on from Changli. Now let's get into another member of the roster, and that's going to be Zhezhi. Zhezhi goes into S. Honestly, she goes above Jiyan. This character is so simple to get value out of, it's fucking ridiculous. She has, quite honestly, one of the easiest rotations in the game. You just intro onto her, you basic attack 3 times, cast her Resonance skill, and then her Liberation, and then start spamming her Resonance skill. She is just absolutely, there's no effort involved into playing her and getting her full rotation off, and honestly playing her well. The most complicated thing she has is a jump cancel that speeds up her rotation, but she doesn't even need it to still have a fast one. And so in terms of ease of use and how much value you're able to get out of her, especially in modes like TOA or holograms, she has to be an S, because she basically plays herself. And when she uses her enhanced resonance skills, right, to like zip around the battlefield, she's avoiding enemy attacks too. She's dodging attacks as well at the same exact time. And so the only thing that does drag her down a little bit is that she absolutely sucks ass in Weewa. She does pretty much nothing in the game mode. She's kind of like just like an she's just like a buffer that makes like a DPS character better. And so there's reason to drop her down because she is that bad in Whimpering Waste. But because of how much she excels in TOA and holograms, I think it's worth it to keep her closer to the top S. Is this tier list for ease of use or value in relation to ease of use? Value in relation to ease of use. Because there are some characters, right, where their full value can only be gotten to if you master how they work. And characters like Changli and Yinlin are kind of an example of that. If you don't really figure out how they work and optimize them, they kind of just, they suck compared to the other options that are going to be above them. But if you do sweat with them, they become astronomically better. Next up, we're going to have Zhang Liao. I'm going to place Zhang Liao above Jiyan because this dude, when he's being played in hypercarry, kind of, again, sort of just plays himself. You liberation after an intro skill and you get buffed, and then you E, throw off a hypercube after an attack, then you just basic attack to get off the second hypercube, and then for the third one, you just E again. And that's the rotation. He slows down time as well every time he uses his liberation or casts a hypercube, and that makes him have more survivability. It makes the enemies act slower and basically gives you more openings to deal your damage without being hit. And for a casual player, that is one of the best things that people can have. And there are so many people across version 1.2 and 1.3 that were only able to clear the TOA and some holograms because they got Zhang Liao for free. And they built him, they pulled his weapon, or they put him on Abyss Surges or Stonard R5, and they were ready to go. And this guy is somebody he's so easy to take advantage of, and he still has a ceiling to optimize him even more, and he does enough damage in these modes to clear everything that you need to. And so he easily belongs in S tier for me. I would say he's even, with his gap closing that's present in his kit, I think he's even a little bit better than Jiyan, if I'm being entirely honest. And he's kind of just as easy to play too if you aren't swap canceling him. Next up, we have Shorekeeper. Shorekeeper's pretty easy. Shorekeeper has some cancels that are built into her kit, but you just get a lot of mileage out of her by just basic attacking, throwing out her little butterflies, and then just like basic attacking until her forte's full. Then you do a heavy attack, and then you just do that as many times as possible until your forte circuit is fully charged up, or until your concerto gauge is charged up, and then you cast your liberation, and then you just move on to the next person. A lot of people might say that the act of like activating her enhanced intro and being on that timer could be a little bit complicated, and so she's still going to be at the top, but I will say maybe a character like Verina will go a little bit above her simply due to the fact that you have to use intro skills and you have to go back to Shorekeeper within 30 seconds to get off her enhanced attack. And that can be a problem for some people. I still have comments on YouTube asking me how you get the Shorekeeper enhanced intro. And so it is a topic that can be difficult for some players to understand. And so because of that, we might have some reason to drop her down in relation to somebody like Verina. But of course, her crit rate and crit damage buffs are also helpful to sort of counteract the casual side of investment as well, because you don't have to roll as well on your echoes or do as much farming or as much investment on the substats if you're kind of getting them for free from a character on your team. So that's kind of like a counterbalance there, and that's why she's still at the top. But yeah, great buffs, great forgiveness on her dodge or on her outro skill that lets you just do a dodge animation after you get hit and immediately recover. It's a great way for her to work and make your gameplay a lot easier. Next up, we're going to have Camellya. And I'm going to be a bit real here. Camellya is a little bit hard to play. Camellya is a little bit hard to play from the perspective of oh my. When the enemies move or when the enemies are mobile, you kind of have to weave in a lot of dodges, a lot of dodge counters, a lot of like good gameplay to get the most out of her. And the thing is, she still does a lot of damage if you just go into Blossom mode and then hold down a button. But if you ever do need a reposition, it can be a very frustrating experience for players. And you do have things like ephemerals getting interrupted. Yeah, you do have a thing where your ephemeral is delayed. If you don't reach certain ER requirements, you won't be able to actually activate ephemeral when you want to, because you need to liberate on her every single rotation. And the end result is just like, she has a lot of potential for like her kit to kind of just completely fuck up. She has a lot of moments in her gameplay where you're just like, oh damn, like I'm delayed like 4 or 5 extra seconds because I forgot to do XYZ thing. She doesn't have to swap in her rotations, but I will say that the actions she has to take while on field are far more complex than any of these other characters. And I wouldn't say that she's like going ahead and like steamrolling all of the game modes that we have. She steamrolls Weewa 1,000,000%, but she can have some troubles in TOA, and she can have some troubles in holograms, depending on the enemy type that you're facing and how mobile they're going to be. For example, her against the Sentry Gargoyle or her against Inferno Rider is like rough, because she kind of has to like sit there and hold still, either spinning this way or spinning this way to deal the majority of her damage. And when you're at risk of getting one shot in something like holograms, it can be a bit rough. However, she doesn't require any complicated swaps, any crazy optimizations to make the most out of her kit, and so she's still gonna go into S. Do keep in mind, these three are really tightly packed together. It might even be worth putting it down like this, if I'm being entirely honest. This might be a better way of differentiating it. We'll see if we fix it up later. All right, next up, we're moving on to the 2.0 roster now. And I'm going to be entirely honest when I say that Carlotta is probably the most new player-friendly character in the game. Carlotta was actually the reason why I created this tier list, because I wanted to emphasize how absurdly easy this character is to use in pretty much any game mode that isn't glacial resistant. She even has the upside of like not even being that bad in Whimpering Wastes. A lot of people have been talking about like how she maybe lacks the AoE. If you just position with her properly, she'll do fine in Whimpering Wastes. And when it comes to game modes like TOA or holograms, this is like a free character. She is the most brain dead unit in the game, where she has built-in ranged CC that freezes an enemy for 1.5 seconds, and then her liberation allows you to dash backwards and then shoot a shot at the same time, effectively kiting bosses that are melee bosses, which most of them are, and they can't even hit you while you're dealing damage. She has multiple time freezes, iframes, and it's almost like she's designed in a couple of ways as like a crutch for players that weren't able to clear some of the game modes. I was like kind of waiting to see if the entire 2.0 roster was going to be as like game-changing as she was, but thankfully, she's kind of like an anomaly. She ignores a lot of the mechanics that are in the game, and the end result is that she could be satisfying to use, but she trivializes basically every hologram that isn't the Sentry construct, and she trivializes any TOA floor that has, you know, only 1 or 2 enemies. And I would say she's fun to use 100%, but it kind of feels like you are playing a different game sometimes. And her strength is absolutely absurd. Her strength is so crazy. She outdamages Jinhsi, she has the highest numbers, and she's the easiest to play. And she isn't even that bad in Whimpering Wastes, especially with a character like Zhezhi, or even a buffer like Yang. Yeah, even a buffer like Yang helping her out. And I gotta say, she's got a ton of team comps. She synergizes really well with Shorekeeper, even works with Verina too. And the end result is that this character is like the biggest skill issue character I've ever seen, in that you can take somebody that's not very good at Wuthering Waves or newer to Wuthering Waves, a lot of people that might have joined in 2.0, put a built Carlotta into their hands, and they'll look like a god of gaming, if we're frankly being real here. The difference between high-level Carlotta play and low-level Carlotta play is like, they're almost right next to each other. They're almost right next to each other because there's so little room to fuck up with this character's rotations. She kind of just plays herself. And so she's going to be the creme de la creme. She's better than all the supports, in my opinion, because she is the easiest DPS character in the game that requires almost no effort to play at an extremely high level. Next up, we got Roccia. I think Roccia is going to go at the top of A, potentially even at the bottom of S. This character is so absolutely... Actually, I'll put her at the top of A because we won't have her sequence nodes. This character is so absolutely ridiculously easy to play, but has like a couple of shortcomings in her kit, namely her lack of interruption resistance in the air that can cause some hiccups across her gameplay. She basically just goes in, you intro skill onto her, you basic attack once, and then you spin, and then slam down 3 times, cast your liberation, and echo skill, and you're done. The reason why she's being dropped down is that A, she can be interrupted across her gameplay, and B, she's fucking hard to build to make her do a lot of damage and then also support at the same time. She's an A because her build, it's really hard to work with, and she needs a lot of substats to sort of like reach her full potential. And despite that, she still has incredible performance in game modes like Weewa. She's still incredibly good in the TOA. She is, however, dog shit in holograms. This might be one of the worst hologram characters I've ever seen. there's pretty much no way that you're going to be able to bounce 3 times consistently and like do rotations that feel good in holograms, because you will get your ass knocked out of the air and one shot against pretty much all the bosses in the game if you're trying to use her. And so I'm thinking about dropping her down maybe a little bit more because of that. I'll maybe drop her into B. I'll keep her at A because of her Weewop performance, but do keep in mind she's going to be at the bottom of A because of her hard build, interruption resistance or lack thereof on her bounces, and she gets absolutely fucking dookied on in holograms. It's not even funny. The character is like, I don't even want to try using this character in any of like that one-shot tier endgame content. Now moving on to the next character on the list, we're going to have Phoebe. I'm going to put Phoebe in B. I'm going to be real here. I think this character has a decent amount of complexity to her. But the thing is, the complexity isn't even from her gameplay. It's the fact that she is 1000% reliant on another character to deal any of her damage. She is 1,000,000% reliant on Spectral Rover constantly being swapped to on field to maintain Spectral Frazzle stacks for her to deal damage. And the end result is that this character is just like, in game modes like Whimpering Wastes, she's dog shit unless you're playing super sweaty with her. And in game modes like TOA, she's a lot better, 1,000,000% better, but she still can have trouble actually reaching 10 Frazzle stacks. Because in your rotation on Spectral Rover, you're going to have to cast your Resonance skill 2 times and then your Liberation. You have to do a tight rotation on Phoebe or in Phoebe's team for her to even access her full strength. And if we're thinking about this at the casual level, right? Is the unsweaty skill issue player going to get 10 Frazzle stacks on the enemy? Are they? That's a question you have to ask, right? And if they don't get 10 Frazzle stacks on the enemy, well, guess what? They're not going to be activating this buff that gives the spectral damage percent. It's not like the craziest buff ever, but this is another lever of complexity that you have to factor into your team rotations to make the most out of this unit. And my point of view is that Phoebe, despite being a bit easier to play, her reliance on Spectral Rover basically means that her difficulty and value is reliant on that other character. And my opinion is she easily moves up into A if she gets an easier to play sub DPS. Maybe she'll go at the bottom of A, but she definitely ascends higher in this tier list if she gets a different partner that's easier to use. But currently in this state of the game, with her performance this tied to Spectral Rover, it does mean that she kind of shares that weaknesses. She shares those weaknesses of Spectral Rover as well. And there are a lot for that character. So with that, that's going to be where Phoebe goes, kind of like bottom of A, top of B. She's easier to play, but at the end of the day, you need a swap with her if you're trying to make the full use out of her potential. While other characters, I mean, let's think about it here. Carlotta versus Phoebe, getting the full potential out of their kits. It's a big wide gap. Next up, we got Brant. I'm going to put Brant up here. Not an S, but near the top of A. The reason why I'm putting Brant near the top of A is for one reason. His build can be hard to balance. If he didn't require very specific echoes to reach a like good performance level, he would be an S. But because of the fact that his investment requires either like, and we're thinking about Brant with his full potential, right? Having a decent amount of ER, because Brant is kind of split up into 2 categories. If Brant doesn't have a lot of ER and kind of just has like Emerald of Genesis or Red Spring and Molten Rift, he's not healing or shielding at all. He's not doing very much healing or shielding because Brant's healing and shielding scale with his ER. And if you don't have any of that, he'll still deal damage, but he won't be doing any of the actual sustain stuff. And so if you're keeping him in mind and we're doing these sort of like rankings with his sustainability in mind, he's S level performance because he does damage, he buffs, he heals, and he shields all in one character. And those are benefits that are amazing for skill issue players, especially in content like holograms. And so if his build was easier to get to have all that capability, he would definitely be an S. But for now, with the caveat that you need to build him really well for him to succeed in all those different roles, that's why he's being bumped down to A, because he has a ton of potential. He has a ton of use cases. He does a lot of great things for you and your account, but you have to work to get all of those benefits. And that can be an issue for some players, right? Putting in the work to do all that farming, to do all of those tunings on your echoes, to pull for his signature weapon to get all of that potential benefit. It's a little bit rough. However, he is worth it, in my opinion, if you are like somebody that's maybe on the lower skill end of the spectrum, because he's kind of like one of the best solo on-fielders in the game. Somebody that isn't really doing rotations. He'll heal your team. He has a big nuke. His concerto gain is fast, and he just gets a lot done. And his rotations are not even hard to use either, because if you're not doing quick swap, he's one of the easiest characters in the game to pick up. You just have to learn how to jump and then hold down the button occasionally. Or honestly, you can just spam his regular attacks and just do that until your forte circuit is filled, and he'll still perform. He is a great blend of a lot of things. The only thing is, he's hard to build, and that's why he's an A. That's going to be all of our limited characters. And I think that those explanations, they make a ton of sense. We see a lot in A, but I just really wanted to highlight just how good these three characters are and how they kind of like, aside from Shorekeeper, how they kind of like play themselves, especially with Carlotta and Jinhsi. And now, let's move on to some of the standards. Let's move on to some of the 4 stars. We got Verina. I'm going to put her an A right below Carlotta, because I would call Verina an easier version of Shorekeeper to use that has a lower ceiling. Verina is just kind of like you swap onto her without using an intro skill, you attack 4 times, you residence skill, liberation, and then jump in the air and attack, and you're done with her. She gets in and out in about 3 to 4 seconds. Her rotation is not even hard to learn. It's super fast, and once you pick it up, she becomes like one of the highest powered batteries you can have on your team for things like concerto, or for things like activating outro skills. And she's just like, she's super simple, super easy to use. S on pretty much every single team she's on. Shorekeeper's just higher if you're willing to be a bit sweatier with her. And that's kind of just like it. Next up, when it comes to standard characters, we're gonna have Calcharo. Yeah, bro's in D. Calcharo, in general, is just too hard to play for the average player. What's going to end up happening when you play this guy without knowing what to do is you're going to liberate, you're going to try to do a death messenger, and you'll just get smacked in your face completely. The move will be interrupted, you'll deal no damage, and now you've lost half your health. You try using this character in holograms without knowing how to use him, and you might as well just quit the game mode entirely. You try to use him in Weewa, your death messenger is going to hit half the mobs, and you're going to want to quit the game entirely. There's just so much stuff wrong with him fundamentally at a level where dodging decreases your DPS. You have to do animation cancels on 10 ping to reach like a damage combo that actually is, you know, comparable to other DPSs. And the skill investment you need to just make him function at the level of pretty much every other character on this list that's a DPS is extremely high. But if you do invest a lot in him, Calcharo is potentially like an A or S tier character in terms of like performance. But the investment required is absolutely absurd. It's ridiculous. It's so high. And it's unfortunately a discovery that a lot of players made after they already used their 5-star selector on him. So that's a little bit rough too. So that's that. Next up, we're going to have Encore. I'm going to put Encore in B. Encore has a lot of optimizations that she needs to put into her kit to reach comparable levels of DPS to other characters. She has some basic attack animation cancels she needs to do. She has like resident skill presses that she needs to use to like cancel some of those attacks. She can be fun to learn, but she requires a lot of finesse in her rotations to do damage comparable to other units. And if she isn't putting that work in on the rotation side, her damage kind of falls off. She's also very, very, very reliant on having a string master on your account to actually do that work too. She doesn't have a lot of like great 4-star options, so she's a little bit lacking on the equipment side as well. If string master is not on banner, it's kind of like, and you don't have it, she kind of like doesn't really exist on your account, and there's always going to be like a better option. But if you have string master and you're willing to do a little bit of work, she will get the job done, but might be too much for some players. The investment required to actually get her working, and she is a standard, right? She is a standard character, and you're probably going to want to use a limited instead in those circumstances. That's going to be 3 of the standard characters. Now we got Ling Yang. The dude is just bad in pretty much every single way. He's bad when you're playing sweaty, and he's bad when you're playing casually as well. Dude has some of the most obtuse and just strange attack animations in the game, especially when he activates his forte circuit and then like starts like bouncing on bongo drums. You're just like, what is this character even doing? Why does he attack like so slow? And like he feels like you're trying to get, you know, those like glass bottles with the ship inside, and like the way that somebody made it was like building the ship using like chopsticks. Playing Ling Yang feels like trying to like navigate and get that ship outside of the glass bottle without breaking the glass. He's just so strange. He just feels so odd to use. And there's a reason why he doesn't even have any mains. Calcharo is weak, but Calcharo has mains. Ling Yang has like 10-10. That's it. And the end result is that he's not popular. Nobody really likes him. He feels like shit to use. And he doesn't even do that much damage in the first place to warrant doing all of that work to pick him up. So he goes in D. I'm actually going to put Calcharo in C. I'm just going to put Ling Yang in D. No, they should share. They should share that last spot. Next up, we got Jiyan. Yeah, this character is kind of shit. We've unfortunately come to the realization that her kit is kind of just non-functional in this game. If you're a casual player, you might get some leverage out of her shield, which is nice, and her outro skill, but unfortunately her concerto gain is pretty much non-existent unless you use her forte, but then using her forte takes like 30 minutes to use in the first place. The only reason why I am even giving her any airtime at all on this casual tier list is the fact that her shield can be pretty big, and her shield heals as well. I can imagine her having some use case in a mode like holograms, as well as if she's being built as a DPS, bit of a use case in game modes like Whimpering Wastes, where she has grouping on her liberation and she can do something at the very least. She's undeniably complete dog shit in TOA, but again, she has a use case in holograms and she has a use case, albeit a small one, in Weewa. So that's why she's going to be in C and not sharing the D spot with Calcharo and Ling Yang. That should be all of our standard characters. Now let's get into Rover. And so I'll be using female Rover for Spectro, and I'll be using male Rover for Havoc. Male Rover, Havoc Rover, goes into... When you have their S6 and you just basically figure out how to enter the Dark Surge after an intro, it's pretty easy. Rover will go into the top of B. When they're being played as a pure hypercarry, they don't deal as much damage as these other characters, but where they shine, 1,000,000% where they shine, is in a dual DPS team comp with a lot of swapping. However, this is the casual tier list. There's not a lot of swapping involved or swapping going on over here. And so them building up to the Dark Surge state can take a while just doing basic attacks. Sure, you can do things like priming up your skill before they intro in, like doing their skill at the start of the rotations. Who's going to do that if you're a Giga Casual? However, with their S6, and then once they're invested in as well, and they have like, you know, a set of echoes, they'll do a lot of damage. And them getting a free 25% crit rate on their S6 means that the more casual your echoes are, the actual bigger impact that those free substats are, because it's just a flat value, 25% that everybody gets. And the more casual you are, the less crit stats you are, the more that 25% actually is relative to the rest of your investments. And so being a character that gets all those free stats, it actually means a lot for them. I could put them at the bottom of A, but I do think that with how their damage kind of like falls behind some of their other competitors, I think top of B is a good spot for them. Maybe I'll put them at the bottom of A. Next up, we got Spectral Rover. I think they go at the bottom of B for me. They do have a pretty simple to use kit, but unfortunately, their only real use case, like the only team that they're not basically fucking useless on, is with Phoebe. And for them to be good or usable in the Phoebe team, they need to be constantly quick swapped to during Phoebe's rotation to reapply the Spectral Frazzle debuff. And once you start throwing some of those like swaps in, stuff can get a little bit tricky. Stuff can get like a little bit annoying, especially if you're somebody that's not used to swapping, not used to doing these in those rotations. If you just kind of like play them in a way where they apply Frazzle once in their rotation and then they don't do it again, Phoebe can still perform, but that's kind of like only in the TOA. If you're ever in a situation like multi-wave content like Weewa and you try to bring Spectral Rover into there, you're gonna have a terrible, terrible time with them. I might drop them down to top of C if I'm being honest. If they're played at a very high level, you can get a lot out of them, especially in combination with Phoebe. But if you're not playing them exceptionally well, not doing a crazy number of swaps, and not going crazy with it, they're kind of dog shit. They're kind of dog shit. I'm going to be frankly entirely honest with you. But if you do sweat and you do optimize their rotations, they're easily an A, maybe top of B. But yeah, Spectral Rover is a lot harder to use than Havoc Rover, but they do have a pretty high ceiling as well. That's going to be both of our Rovers on here. Now let's start getting into some of the 4-star units. Sanhua. I think that Sanhua goes into S in terms of ease of use. I do have to say that Sanhua is, you effectively, for her rotation, you press 3 buttons. You press E, you press R, and then you hold down the heavy attack button. Her Forte circuit, the active region of it after you press E and R is so large, the attack is pretty much impossible to miss unless you like, genuinely, I do think Sanhua's detonation is impossible to miss unless you have like some kind of like disability or you're not even trying. Like you just ER and then you hold it and the active zone is literally half of her circuit. It's like, it might even be larger. It might even be larger than 50% of the circuit. You either have to have a massive amount of ping or like you have to be like missing it on purpose or you like just can't see it because it's pretty easy to land. And so if you're able to do that, you don't even have to do any swaps, right? Your Forte circuit is just going to be completely filled up and then you move from character to character. I think a lot of people might have like overstated how difficult she is to work with. I'm pretty sure it's just you practice for like 2 or 3 minutes and you're like 100% ready to go. The complicated part with her is when you start incorporating some swaps, right? To swap her out when she's doing her detonation. And that's where any complexity might come in. But that's one of like the more like introductory easy swaps in the game. And if you do no swaps on Sanhua, there's kind of like no effort at all. You're going to need to put into learning her, but you might tank a couple of hits while she's doing the detonation attack. But that's not a huge deal, especially on the teams that she's working with. And of course, Sanhua is going to give a big buff to basic attack damage as well. And that's going to do a lot, right? That's going to do a lot for characters like your Camelyas, your Brants if they're being played hyper carry, and of course your Encores. And having that much strength, that much power, it's good. It's solid. Next up, we're gonna have Alto. Yeah, no, this dude is just dog shit. This dude is kind of just completely dog shit in kind of like every role you play him in if you're not playing him sweaty. I think there's like one use case for him where he's like a DPS, but you put a second enemy next to him and he cannot do anything. He is like one of just kind of like, I think the worst designed characters in the game from the perspective of the second that there's a second enemy on the battlefield, he might as well just like have no DPS at all because none of his attacks can functionally hit more than one enemy. And it's a huge shame because he has a really fun play style. He's able to go ahead, zip around the battlefield, you know, have like these clones that can like distract the enemy. But the problem is that the second there's a whiff of an AoE encounter, he might as well not exist. And so he has a specialized use case as like a single target DPS. But in a game like this, you don't want to really invest in a character who's only good in one type of situation because they are basically all of your investments will do nothing for you the second you take that character into any other situation. And that's kind of like what it is for Alto. He is absolutely unusable in Whimpering Wastes. And he is unusable in any TOA floor that has more than one enemy. And the end result, guys, his best mode is holograms. But there are still better characters for holograms than him. So that's the story of Alto. Maybe he goes into C. I'm kind of okay with putting him in D. Well, I guess we'll put him there for now. Baizha. Baizha goes into bottom of B. She kind of exists as like just the slower, shittier version of Verina, and that's kind of what she's known for. She's like Verina if you put her in molasses and then like put her in like the opposite of whatever the hyperbolic time chamber is. It feels like if you played Verina and then you play Baizha, they essentially give the same buffs. Verina has like 5% more attack. You're just like playing Verina in slow motion. She does have an issue with swapping onto her in the middle of combat. She'll play this long-ass animation that doesn't do anything at all. But if you're not swapping and you're playing super casual, you don't really even notice that. But her need to pick up her feather too to even get her buffs is so bad. Because you might just end up in a situation where you're like running across the battlefield, you're like misinputting like your directional keys, and you don't even pick up the feather to get her attack buff. Verina just gets everything automatically for basically just existing. But because there's not a lot of other supports on the roster, Baizhi's just going to be elevated up to B. Brant is another healer, but Baizhi still has her 15% damage amp to the entire team. That's just like a utility. That's a benefit that is going to be valuable, especially if you don't have Shorekeeper. So yeah, that puts her at bottom of B for sure. Next up, we got Dan Jin. I'm going to put Dan Jin in C. Yeah, the character's tendency to need to go to like 25% HP to deal any damage, knowing that this is a casual tier list, is probably the biggest weakness of her kit. If this was a bit more of like higher skilled play, I think she would go into like B or A. But if we're looking at it from the casual perspective, I don't really think that a character that is constantly in every game mode, one hit away from death, in her optimal rotations is going to be the pick for a casual player. It's just simply a matter of like, if you get hit once, you die. And for a casual player, that's really not a limitation that makes a lot of sense for them. And so I do see a lot of people telling me not to put her in C. Where else would you put Dan Jin for a casual player? Oh, yeah, okay. Maybe we put her in D. Yeah, I guess we just put her in D. C was probably too high. I'm probably gonna put her in D because I don't think casuals even touch this character. Being one hit away from death in every game mode is kind of like not really a thing that's gonna resonate with a casual player. So I think it's fair to put her there. And yes, she drains her own HP doing regular attacks. That's a bit of an issue, guys. It's a bit of an issue. Chisha. There's something wrong with this character. I'm gonna be entirely honest. It feels like there's something wrong with Chisha as a whole, where her gameplay is like a combo of like really easy button presses, like holding and stuff, but like her damage just kind of isn't there relative to other characters. Her damage kind of just isn't there at all relative to other characters. It's just, Chisha is, for the work that you're putting into learning her and doing her rotations and maximizing her buffs, she just kind of does less damage than everybody else. And when we're looking at this to see like, you know, like difficulty to payout ratio of each character, she's kind of not really incredibly difficult to use, but she doesn't have great results when you do use her and you learn how to do it. And so, yeah, I can't really even consider putting her in B, knowing who's in B, because, you know, as a 4-star DPS, she kind of just falls short. Yeah, maybe we'll put her above John Shin, but I do think it's going to be C tier. Mortifi. I think Mortifi goes into A. He is genuinely one of the easiest characters in the game. You just sit there pew-pewing, you press E when your Forte circuit is filled, you press E when it's not filled, and then you just press your liberation and then swap to somebody else. He is so simple to play, he's so simple to use. Him just getting a recast of his Forte circuit on his resident skill when it's full is just, it's just very simple, easy to pick up gameplay that nobody's ever really gonna struggle with. And in combination with a character like Jiyan, it ends up being one of the easiest duos in the game. And then, you know, depending on which support you choose, it gets easier or harder. It's just a simple team to use. He's a simple character to pick up. His buffs are incredibly strong. You can use him with Phoebe and you can use him with Jiyan. Unfortunately, his roster selection is a little bit limited right now, but the more heavy attack characters that come out in the future, the more use cases he'll have. He is, in my opinion, he has potential to be up here. If I'm going to be real, he has potential to be an S. And the only thing that I think is holding him back from being an S is maybe having more characters to work with. But yeah, I would say I might just put Mortifi even up to here. I don't think bottom of A is the right spot for him. I might even put him like up here if I'm frankly being honest. I'll put him right below Jiyan. Moving on, we got Tao Chi. I'm gonna put Tao Chi in B. I'm going to put Tao Chi in B for the sole fact that she is a hologram god. The character quite literally can make you almost close to invulnerable in content like holograms. She has a damage reduction on her resonance skill that applies to the entire team, and has shielding that she applies to the entire team, a shared shield. And the end result is that if she's using something like the Bell Born Geochalone and you're going into bosses like holograms, my oh my, this character is absolutely fucking crazy. She can do so much in terms of your survivability. It is ridiculous. However, the one thing that she has to be on the lookout for is her absurdly slow rotation time. But you have to think about it this way. A casual doesn't really care too much about their rotation time. They just care about clearing the content. And if that is the case, and Tauchi is buffing a character that's built like Carlotta, I'm not gonna lie, you combine these two together, Carlotta and Tauchi, you have like the best hologram team for skill issue players, I think, like in the game. Because on the off chance that you do get hit in the holograms, assuming that Carlotta does get hit while on field, you'll have Tauchi's shield and then like her damage reduction active the entire time. And so Carlotta can just muscle through every single hologram in the game, kind of like not even caring about dodging, as long as Tauchi is over here with the rotation up. And I think that use case alone for a casual player is enough to put Tauchi in B. 1,000,000%. She will, however, have some troubles in the TOA, and she is kind of dog shit in Weewa because of how slow that rotation time is. And so that's why she's not going to be higher. But if the opposite was the case, Tauchi would definitely be higher. So we've only got a couple of characters left. We got Yang Yang. I'm gonna put Yang Yang in C. If you're a casual player, the right way to play Yang Yang is to do constant swaps to like build up her forte circuit across other characters' rotations. And if you're not swapping with Yang Yang, she is kind of bad. I'm gonna be entirely 1,000,000% real here. The benefit of using Yang Yang is the fact that her outro skill does not expire on a swap. And so when you're using her to support somebody, you're like constantly swapping with her across her rotation and weaving in her heavy attacks to like build up her forte circuit and then kind of dealing damage with her at the same time as another character. And if you're not doing that, she's kind of just not that good and kind of falls behind a lot of other characters on the roster. And I'll put her in B just because of her Weewa use cases, where if you're not constantly swapping with her, her constant AoE grouping is incredibly helpful, and her energy to the incoming resonator can also be very, very helpful too. But if you're not swapping, you're again not reaching her full potential, and she is like a little bit lower than the other characters, especially the other sub DPSs, due to her lack of buffing. But she has a lot more utility to make up for it on the side, and so I think she's worthy of B just for her utility alone. Next up, we got Yanwu. Yeah, this guy's just dog shit. He kind of only exists because Jinhsi's in the game. He does no damage. All he is a coordinated attack bot. And I do feel like there are two other characters that just do the coordinated attack bot thing just better than him at this point. He does no damage. He has like interruption resistance on an ability, but that kind of like doesn't even feel like real interruption resistance. And he kind of just feels like a waste of a team slot in like 99% of circumstances. It feels like he just doesn't do a lot. And while he can give a shield at higher sequence nodes and have some sustain that way, it's just like, why would you use him if you have any other option? But if you have no other options, he's there. He's there if you have no other options. He's defense scaling, so maybe he'll have like some hidden synergies and some hidden bonuses in the future. But at least at this current stage in the game, where there are more and more coordinated attackers than ever, he's incredibly lacking, and it's a little bit unfortunate. Yoo-hoo. She buffs coordinated attacks. She also has like crit scaling in her skill tree. She's supposed to be like a main DPS. The end result is that she is trying to do so many different things at once, and she kind of does none of them. Requires heavy investment to deal damage, buffs a coordinated attacker with her outro skill, but then like also heals at the same time. She's a complete disaster of a character that doesn't have the right multipliers, requires like a weird play style, requires like investment in teams where she, like a Verina or Shorekeeper, is just a better option than her. And she has like RNG built into her kit where her sequence nodes give like a 10% chance to like be immune to damage. And it's just like, what sort of game or character am I playing here? Why is there a gotcha and a gotcha? And that's kind of just Yohu as a character. There's a reason why you never see her in any gameplay footage other than Rexlance, because nobody else wants to use the fucking character, and he's just soloing content with her. That's it. That's literally it. Nobody uses her for a reason. I have not seen her leveled on almost any account that I've reviewed. Never seen her geared. She's just kind of completely useless. And maybe she'll have a partner in the future that makes her better, or maybe she'll just be abandoned, like I think her kit kind of deserves. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we got Lumi. We have Lumi. And I'm gonna be real here. Lumi's either in bottom of C or she's in D. This character kind of just has some issues. She kind of has some issues where she does kind of no damage. She kind of doesn't really do anything unless you're using her liberation. She has like some weird different attack modes where she can be like running and stuff and then like shooting like a laser from like behind her, but it doesn't do anything. It's kind of just like a waste of it's kind of like waste of your rotation time. And then when you do like dash with her and then like jump on the enemy and start attacking them with the sword, she doesn't do any damage either. The only meaningful damage in her kit is kind of like in her liberation, and she has like a decent outro skill that'll like buff resident skill damage, but that shit only lasts 10 seconds. Brant is like what Lumi should have been, in my opinion. A character that can deal good damage while on field, good burst damage, and then has a fully powered outro skill. She just has a 10-second one for kind of like no reason, because it's not like she's doing incredible damage or incredible burst damage like Changli to warrant a shorter outro skill. She's just kind of lacking in a lot of ways. And even if she is like easy to play, she has like an auto shooter and stuff like that, she's just not very good. And she falls behind a lot of the other 4-star options, 1,000,000%. So that's going to be every single character in the game rated in terms of, you know, how good they are from a casual perspective. We've incorporated things like investment required to actually work, the complexity of their play, how easy it is to pick up their rotations. And the idea is that the higher they are, the better bang for the buck you're going to get in terms of the skill investment. There are some characters that are just not really ever going to be worth it unless you're going to be giga sweaty with them. You know, they're just not worth it based off the power level. That's typically what you're going to see down here. But as you get higher up, that's where a lot more of the rankings are going to start shifting, right? Your Changli with a shit ton of skill investment is going to be way higher. So is your Yinlin. So is your Yang. While on the other hand, right, you might have characters that are just staying in the same exact spot at higher investment. Brant is definitely near the top if I was going to look at it from like a, you know, super sweaty perspective with all the quick swap. But for now, with a little bit of skill investment, or not that much investment in echoes, and just kind of looking at it from a beginner perspective of who's going to give you the most performance, I think that this is what this list looks like. And so think about this as like all S0 characters, maybe S6 if they're a 4-star, but I think this is a good list. I think that this is a good list. So with that, we've gone over all the disclaimers, we've gone over all the rankings. Let me know what you all think, and peace out.